research just continually shows that like using a moderate to higher damper setting or like a setting for a gear on a bike is more efficient in terms of energy utilization at a given power output. So like if you have an RPE chart in front of you, you'll look at it and it'll have like a number scale 1 to 10, and then it will have description on the side of it. I use the descriptions.
So you do not even assign the number, you just use the description?
Most often I don't use the number because most people don't get it. The idea that discipline is separate from motivation is insane, because you would not be disciplined if you weren't motivated to act on what you're doing. There'd be no such thing. Like, you wouldn't be disciplined in it because there'd be nothing to work towards.
The Fitness Movement is brought to you by Zor Fitness. We offer coaching and individualized program design, as well as educational content for coaches and athletes. It's all one place, zorfitness.com. I think Sam Smith on his podcast, which I don't even know if they do anymore, but he mentioned Spiral Out, and I looked you guys up and found you. And then it wasn't actually until I started listening to the podcast for a while that I like put together like that you guys are OPT and all that. So I kind of worked my way into the connection kind of backwards. Because cool. I up front didn't realize that you guys were actually the ones doing the podcast. So it was I've learned a lot from it. So that was the main reason why. Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah. We've done a lot of different types of episodes. A lot.
Yeah. And that was part of the reason why, like, I was like, oh yeah, they can give you a day or two to get back to you on some topics. And then I started like re-listening to episodes, and you guys have put out so much that it's like, it's also like very dense,
They're
information.
Very dense.
So so there's a lot that, you can dig through.
Yeah. Not a lot of episodes, but a lot of information for sure.
Yes. Yeah. Which is exactly, I mean, I don't know if you were trying to cater to anybody or you're just doing it mainly for in-house and then sharing it with people, but it was extremely helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, it was mainly for in-house. It was like a team project.
Yeah.
That's what it was for.
I feel like it's a good way to think about it too, because then it makes it a little bit more sustainable for you guys.
Yeah, it's like instead of doing like other, team things or like team building or that type of stuff, we work on something like that together as a project to put it out.
Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to ask how many coaches you guys have.
Yeah, we have 3 coaches. Myself, and Scott and Kat.
Yeah.
And Kat's our nutrition coach too.
Gotcha.
Yep. So what do you do?
You guys have been there for how long?
I've owned the business, and now I own it along with Scott, but I've owned it since 2012. And before that, I worked for this business since 2008, because my brother James FitzGerald owned it at the time from while I was working there from 2008 into 2011, and then I bought it from him.
Yeah.
But the business officially started, I think it was June 2005. So this is the 20th year of Optimum performance training.
Yeah, congrats. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, so I've been around for 17 of them.
Yeah. Yeah, so you and your brother James kind of, he's the one who started OPEX, and then OPT was sort of like the origination of all of that. So just trying to give people a connection as to, working back to you.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could go over like, why don't we just do it for you? Like, for your demographic of like who you're working with right now, like coaching, remotely or otherwise, like who's your like subsections of your demographics you work with?
Yeah. Let's see. It's like very simply, there's, if you break it into 2 groups, there's people who are probably goal. I don't want to, maybe not the best way to break it up, but people who are goal oriented, like their entire reason for training is based on a specific goal, and they want to achieve a certain result or a certain outcome, and it's usually sport related or some achievement. And then the other people who it's more, it's not that it's not that they're training, they don't have any goals. It's just that the goal is to just keep doing the training because they love training, and they want to just keep doing it because they love it, and they really enjoy the training programs we provide them and I provide them. So that's what they really like. And they're not really big grandiose goals. It's just like, I love doing this and I want to do it as good as I can. And like, I spend 90 minutes a day in the gym 4 to 5 times a week, and I want to really make the best of it. And then there's a lot of people that come to our gym here, and we like to think we have a really good, welcoming gym, which we do. And people really enjoy that environment to be here with others. And it's yeah, again, everyone down there basically have their own thing going on, but it never feels like you're on your own.
Yeah. Yeah, you're just alongside other people there, and just not doing the same thing.
It's just so normal now that people come and they do what's planned for them, and that's it. They don't worry about what someone else is doing. They don't think of it that way. It's just normal. So there's no issue with it.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard you describe it somewhere as like the open gym model, where basically everybody's doing their own thing. But again, the other people that are there. You guys have coaches on staff who are of like hours, and
that's all we've ever done.
Sure, people have support. Yeah,
we've never had group classes. We've only ever done open gym.
Yeah.
So and personal training, right? That's basic stuff. But yeah, that's what we do. So and we offer education courses too, or seminars.
You do now?
Seminars, yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah. Are they in person or remote?
They're live over Zoom.
Gotcha. Cool. Let's look into that.
Are you on our coaches rating list?
I am not.
Okay. Well, you'll see it come up soon.
Maybe I listen to your podcast so faithfully when you do publish it. So it's like, maybe in addition to the coaching education, you got to throw some call to actions in there, because I definitely would have been on that.
Yeah, see, I'm bad at that. Very bad at that. See, you didn't even know that I made the podcast. That's
not
okay.
For a while. Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. So you also do provide some really good content on Instagram if people want to follow Optimum Performance Training on there.
Yeah.
So you kind of mentioned before that there was sort of two camps of people who are more goal oriented and more like lifestyle, long term sustainability.
Yeah.
Where do you personally fall on that spectrum?
Yeah, the long term lifestyle sustainability. What you said.
Yeah.
That's
I was just curious because you were like, again, one of the things I heard you talk about is like like when you stop competitive CrossFit, and I feel like a lot of people will be able to relate to this, is like when you stop competitive CrossFit or whatever sporting endeavor, it's like for a lot of athletes who are motivated by that goal, it's like all of a sudden that's pulled away. Sometimes you need to like set a new one.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was maybe like the marathon for you. So I wasn't sure if you're like still like kind of use like those interim goals or like checkpoints to like kind of push yourself. Yeah,
I do. I've been dealing with an Achilles tendonitis issue for the last literally 2.5 years. And it's getting closer to being resolved. So, but now I'm at a point where I'm at the lowest amount of running I've done in probably 6 years. As a result of doing that, like I run pretty much 25 to 30 kilometers a week to try to manage it while I'm doing all the different treatments. And yeah, so the goal is to be able to, the first goal would be to, be able to train normally, or I would say train without too much issue or too much pain.
Yeah.
And then would be, can I start redoing some of my old performances?
Yeah.
But I just use that as something I just like doing it. I like getting out of the gym. I like running. I like running through different areas of the city. I really enjoy that. So it's like it is a performance related goal. Like I do want to get back to what I was capable of doing before. But if I can't, I don't really care either. I just really enjoy doing it.
Yeah, the process of doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just it helps me think. I think really well when I'm running. To a point where I go home and I have to record something in a note, or I have to write something down. Like that's where
solitude. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I remember I had a problem. I was trying to think about how to explain a certain concept for a new seminar. I've been talking about this new seminar for like a year and a half, but I was like trying to figure out how to explain it to somebody, and someone asked me a question at the gym. I was like, what about this? And I was like, that's a good question. And then I went and ran, and I came back, and I just drew it on the board for them. I was like, this is what I mean. And they're like, oh, I get it. I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, but that was a good question, because that made me have to answer an obvious question, and that was good. But I literally went out for like a 40-minute run, came back and drew it down, and I took a picture of it.
Yeah. Yeah. You probably couldn't do that at the end of like Merv or something.
No, no, exactly.
Yeah.
It's too intense, right?
Yeah. I guess that's maybe what I was trying to bring up is like, there's some things that are more like intrinsically rewarding. And I think maybe that depends a little bit on your essence too, is like, not everyone's just going to enjoy going out for a run, but yeah, if you do, it's one of the things that's going to keep it sustainable.
Yeah. And you can also think about, you always think about that, right? Those modalities like that, like running, swimming, and biking as an example, like the three main endurance sports. Not the only ones, but the three main ones are like cross-country skiing. People can do those modalities their whole life, right? They can start it and never stop it. And the thing about it is that the modality itself provides such an experience that it's not boring, right? Like imagine you could pick only one movement in CrossFit to do for the rest of your life.
Yeah, running.
You're only going to pick cycling or running. That's it.
Yeah, cycling or running. Yeah,
that's all you're going to pick. You're not going to pick any other modality, right? Because the modalities in isolation are actually not very experiential. They're not that enjoyable, and it's like CrossFit is definitely the definition of the sum is greater than its parts.
Yeah.
Where if you just look at things individually, it's actually really boring. But it only comes together when it's done right.
Yeah, so I'm going to read a statement and we'll see if it triggers you. I think it will. And then I'll just let you go from there.
Okay.
Motivation may get you started, but discipline keeps you going. I'd just be curious on your thoughts on
that. Yeah, I think I've been over that a lot, right? Is that people just don't, I think whatever that statement would mean that like the person just, they don't understand what motivation is really, right? And I remember I shared an article from Greg Everett. It was an older article, I think, from Greg Everett he'd shared or something. And I can't remember when it was, but it was a little while ago. But he's like, the idea that discipline is separate from motivation is insane, because you would not be disciplined if you weren't motivated to act on what you're doing. There'd be no such thing. Like you wouldn't be disciplined in it because there'd be nothing to work towards.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that like you've talked about extensively is the fact that if you're an athlete, you have to have that sustained motivation. You're just not going to do it.
Yeah, and the simple thing with like people talking about being disciplined, like and not understanding how motivation works, they're being disciplined on something that they're trying to achieve. Okay, try being disciplined on something you don't want to achieve. Try it. Just think of something you're like, I don't want to do this at all. Now go be disciplined on it. You won't do it.
No.
Because you're not motivated to achieve it, and you're not motivated in that task, right? But people they have a very like surface level understanding of what motivation is, and you would think about it in terms of emotion or energy. That's not it, right? That's not motivation. That's maybe an aspect of motivation and what it feels like. But like again, you could like it's you. Yeah, it's. I think it's just like they're looking too closely at the word. They're like zooming in way too much, and they're not stepping back to go like, oh yeah, this is the thing that drives everything. Right? You can just do like you can go to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT, are incentives important for action? And they'll be like, yes, incentives are very important for action. Yada yada. Here and like provide me an example in economics, and they're like, go. And then you would go, okay, so are incentives somewhat related to motivation? Yes, incentives very much produce motivation because they incentivize people to act, blah, blah, blah. Like, yes, everybody knows this stuff. This is very obvious. And you can read writers from 100 years ago to 50 years ago to different topics, and they're all going to talk about it in that way, right? discipline is like an idea of persistence of motivation, right? That's the time course of motivation. There's an intensity to it, right? There's a direction, and there's a duration of it, right? So the
Yep.
intensity is like how intensely motivated are you, and it usually can be seen through the observable the behavior. Usually, the direction is like what are you motivated towards, and the duration is the persistence aspect of what is it like. How does it manifest itself over time? And then people are like, yeah, but it's just being disciplined. It's like, yeah, but there has to be something that you're aiming towards long term. And then things become more routine for you and they become more automatic. And it's like, well, you don't got to be motivated to do it. You're like, yeah, because you've made it routine. So you've reduced the motivational spend to a minimum, which is what you want. You want all those things in your life to become as minimal as possible, so that the one thing you really care about, you can drain it on that. So it might be like sport. Like you're like, I'm training for sport. You're like, I have all these things in my life minimized. So the motivation required to do this stuff is just so small. I got it so small. But then when it comes time for my sport, I just drain that thing. But if you're draining it like twice as much in all the remedial tasks, you can't drain it as much on the thing that matters.
Yeah. Is that tied to RPE as well? And maybe real quick, just go over what RPE is if people don't know.
Well, in a sporting context or exercise context, they are connected, right? Day-to-day life, it's I think more harder to connect those two.
Yeah, fair.
But it is like you still have like day-to-day activities, and like even some simple things is like, would you, like if you're sitting down and eating dinner, would you be willing to get up, and like go outside and just like, oh, I'm just gonna go shovel the snow off the patio because that's where I live. No, I wouldn't care. But if my son or daughter was like, hey, Dad, I want to go outside and shovel the snow with you, I'm like, all right, I'll do it, because I'm motivated to act because they want to do it with me. And then I understand I'm willing to give the effort because it's going to satisfy the goal of spending time with them. So that's like a simple example of a life thing. But RPE in the context of sport is very connected to motivation, in my opinion, and mainly from the opinion of Samuel Marcora, who, if anyone doesn't know who that is, I'm sure a lot of people don't know who he is, but he's probably the maybe most popular scientist to push that idea of the connection between motivation and RPE and how they work together. Perceived exertion. It's just like a sense of how hard and strenuous the task is, or how hard and strenuously you're working. And it's based on your brain summation of the motor output to the working musculature and to the breathing musculature as to how hard or strenuous a task is. And it's a feed forward system. So your brain derives, or your brain sends the signals to the working musculature to work. And it also sends signals to the sensory area to tell your brain how hard you're working. And just for a really quick example, so it's not your legs telling your brain they're working hard. It's your brain telling your legs to work hard. And then your brain recognizes how hard it's telling them to work. And then athletes should become very attuned to that, and they should become very attuned to their RPE, and then like how they respond to different intensities. And more so than anything, how it changes over time during a task. That's the most important aspect of it, as to how to project into the future. And this guy, Ross Tucker, for a different reason, had an idea. It's called like RPE anticipation, which I thought that was a really great term, is to know how things are going to move into the future. But he was doing that to satisfy the goal of proving the central governor model, which again, we're going to get off topic here, but the central governor model is an idea of a catastrophic type of limitation to performance. So the brain stops you from working harder to protect the heart and the brain. Whereas the model from Samuel Marcora is you stop working so hard because it's literally too hard. It feels too bad.
Yeah.
But then like on the other side of it is like, yeah, you do stop because it feels so bad, but there is a limit, but it's not because your brain is like, it's very nuanced, right? Because obviously like a system, like an evolved system, like your body or a design system, whatever you think, is not just going to explode if you work hard. That would be a really shitty body. It's like, imagine you worked really hard and you just died the first time you did that. That'd be very bad.
Yeah. But I feel like one of the things that you've talked about
Yeah.
is, this is very different if you have someone who is, a 45-year-old accountant who's coming to your gym and doing a 5K time trial versus someone who's running the Olympic trials. And maybe that's just like that baseline level of motivation to the task.
Yeah, and then that's a simple example. All right, another way to it's like when people talk about motivation not really mattering in terms of behavior and whatever, you have to think of a reverse example and go, okay, find someone that's not motivated and get them to do something. Get them to do something productive. And I usually I like using analogies. I'm like, but people who talk about motivation not mattering, it's like people who are billionaires saying that money's not that important. You have so much of a resource, you don't even understand it. You don't realize you have it. But try not having it. Try, and the easiest way to do that is to take someone who is motivated and get them to do something they hate. Do something that you hate, and keep doing it. Let's see your discipline. Let's go. But you won't. You're gonna stop doing it. You're like, this sucks. I hate this. You're like, but I thought if you worked, it just came. It was just like, motivation follows action. It's like you're not actually motivated. You just start doing things, and then things happen. It's like, well, yeah, I get that, but try doing something you don't want to do, and keep doing it, and do it really intensely. It's going to be very hard to stay on task because your motivation to do it is very low, and so like the effort required to stay on task is going to start matching that ceiling of motivation. It's going to I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. Right. And so the motivational intensity, or the potential motivation, I should say, sets the ceiling for how hard you're going to work. And so if the potential motivation for something, like let's say, go to the library and read a random book. Like, okay, I want you to stay there for 8 hours and read this book you hate and just keep reading it. Like your likelihood of persisting in that is low unless someone does what? Someone adds something to raise the potential motivation. I'll give you $20,000 if you finish that book in 8 hours. You're like, I got it. I can do it. Right? But nothing happened other than changing the incentives.
Yeah.
Right?
Of the CrossFit Games athletes you've coached, are there any who you find that you have to, push or give carrots to more frequently, or are they mostly people who you have to hold back?
Oh no, they were all different. I've had say one, and I'm talking about individual CrossFit Games athletes, and I guess like with the master, if it's just individual CrossFit Games athletes, there's Joey, and then Alex and Albert and Meredith. So there's 4 individual CrossFit Games people, and the Masters people was lots more than that. But
yeah,
they're all different. Joey, no one's gonna remember Joey because he was 2012. He was an older competitor. He was a very mature competitor. I can barely even remember that now. Alex was definitely someone who she worked very hard, and you would definitely be like, you're gonna have to hold her back. Mm-hmm. And then Meredith and Albert were more similar, I would say, in that you had to manage the amount of training they did because that's just who they were. And it's because I think, like, especially with Meredith, I know Meredith's a lot better than Albert, but you could just overdo it. And she would do better if you kind of toned it down a little bit, because her essence is to just be powerful and strong. And if she's able to express that, then she's probably going to perform well. As opposed to just pushing her too hard, making her tired, she won't do well. Whereas Alex could just survive and probably thrive in that. And that's just her essence, because she's not geared to that side of things. And that's hard for people to understand too. And but I would say most commonly amongst individuals that I work with is the idea that they have to constrain themselves or have to step back. And it's not just something as simple as doing less training. it's something as like, I wrote, like, I want you to do between 4 and 6 sets of this, but set 4 was really hard, and you should stop now. You should stop because you know what I want. I don't want you grinding these reps out, but you persist and do sets 5 and 6. So in that way, right, the persistence or the continued motivation and at time, like the intensity of it, is actually counteractive. It's being counterproductive. It's too much. Like, you're too motivated, and you have to actually just step back from it and go, okay, this is not helping. Like, I need to stop. But that's the hardest part, is for people to go, I want this so badly. I want to try so hard. I want to achieve whatever I'm seeking, but I have to just slow down here. I have to think for the future. That's really hard. And that's on like the real, like, just a real immediate example. But over time, it's the same thing too, is to go, like, you probably need to do a little less, but then the individual has to sit with that, and just be okay with, like, doing a little less is actually the best course. It's not, doing a little less doesn't mean you're lazy or you don't care, right? Doing a little less and not doing more is showing that you really care, because you're doing something you don't really want to do. Like, you would really rather train a lot more, because you'd feel more in line with what you think you need to do, because you really like training and working hard. But what happens when that's not helping? Right? What happens when that's helping? Especially when you get athletes over 30 in CrossFit, or men like in their late 20s even could be in that camp, right? You probably do need to stop doing so much. You probably need to just do less in whatever way that is, right? Yep. But that, for some people, that's really hard to do.
Yeah.
Versus on the other end of it, people who are not motivated, that is not the problem. The problem is not you're doing too much. The problem is you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
And or you're not willing to try hard, like, at all. Yep. So what are we doing here?
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess for those people, they'll just never get to that level. Like, and likely they just either don't need
to.
Yeah.
They don't need to, right?
That's fine.
That's usually an honest discussion of what they're trying to achieve, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, some people who are, and like you initially asked about clients we had, people who aren't goal oriented. Yep. And I don't want to say that. It's like they're fitness and lifestyle type individuals. They're doing it for longevity. They don't need to get that. But then when you go back to the discussion of motivation, and they're like, you can sense that these people they don't have a high ceiling on what they're willing to do. Their willingness to act is not maximal, right? It's moderate. So you have to design the training to suit that. You can't design training asking for maximal motivation scenarios when they're not going to give it. Or you can design it, but then expect it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? And specifically, it's not usually in the context of lifting. Usually it's easier for people to do that because it's less affected by that, I find. It's more so if you have things that are going to be challenging in terms of recovery, like work capacity stuff. If you have to do work, rest, and they're really hard sets, or it's like something of a continued output for an extended period of time, as soon as it gets to a point where they have to decide, am I going to keep hanging on to this? They won't. So it'd be your best interest as a coach to try to design it in a way that doesn't put them in that scenario, because that's not the goal. The goal isn't to push them to be an athlete. They're not asking to do that. They're not asking you to compete. They just want to enjoy training. But you have to understand how that works and how that connects to intensities.
All right, let's talk about RPE and percentages a bit. So RPE, rating perceived exertion. You can say what kind of scale you use, and let's just talk competitive athletes.
I use 1 to 10. I use 1 to 10.
Okay, cool. I know that a lot of the research does not. Just for people listening, but
yeah, you should do 6 to 20.
Yeah, yep. So with the training that you write for your competitive CrossFit athletes, do you use a mix of RPE and percentages?
I usually use wording. I use wording. The wording associated with the number. So like if you have an RPE chart in front of you, you'll look at it and it'll have like a number scale 1 to 10, and then it will have description on the side of it. I use the descriptions. So
you do not even assign the number, you just use the description?
most often I don't use the number because most people don't get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. They don't understand. So I usually just use the wording and I explain what it should feel like and how it should feel and that type of stuff.
Yep. Could you go over maybe a couple of those?
Yeah.
Like the wording you use?
Yeah. Okay. Let's use an example. Do you work out?
I do.
Okay. Do you run or row or anything?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a competitive CrossFit athlete.
Okay. What's your best 2K row?
Good question right now. I mean, 645 maybe.
Okay. So that's 141-ish per 500.
Like
and so let's just guess, okay? We're going to say that your quote unquote easy pace, so meaning like an RPE of 4, probably 4 and under, which is going to be like easy, very comfortable. Breathing is controlled, not unduly fatiguing. More than anything, it's boring. That's the type of pace. So be like, okay, Ben, I want you to row for 30 minutes at 205 to 210 per 500 meters on the rower. And then I'll give you that pace, and then I'll I'll explain like this is what I want it to feel like, and this is why I'm wanting to be like that. So I give you the intensity I want generally, and I'll give you the descriptor of what I'm asking it to feel like. But I'm not going to write RPE 3 or 4 to 10.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm just guessing that's what that pace would be because that's similar to someone else. And then if I was to write something different, I'd be like, okay, Ben, I want you to do. Let's just say we had a progression over 6 to 8 to 10 weeks. Okay, now we're at like 5 minutes of rowing at 151 to 154, 1 minute rest for an hour. We've got to that. And I'm going to say, okay, this is going to like set 1 and set 2 and set 3 are each going to get harder, probably and harder. And it's going to feel harder and harder. But the last several sets are probably going to feel the same throughout. Like it's going to like your effort will increase over the first few sets, but it will stabilize, or it should stabilize if we're at the right pace. And it's going to feel hard, uncomfortable, and annoyingly doable. You're like, I can do this, but man, this sucks. Like your breathing rate will be high, but it's not going to keep going higher because it's meant to be a sustainable design. And sustainable means in terms of metabolic rate. So you should achieve a steady state. But it's going to feel hard, but it's not going to get to a point where you can't do it. And you're not going to be burning up too much. Your arms aren't going to burn too much. Your legs won't burn too much because that's not what's going to be happening as over the course of the intensity prescription. So see, but the RPE would be 5, 6, which is going to be like hard to like hard or heavy and that type of stuff. I think hard is the main descriptor they use. And so I'd say like it's going to feel hard, challenging, very doable, but like annoyingly so. Go ahead.
Well, I actually forgot what I was going to say, but I just remembered this. I saw a company one time post this workout, and it was like 1 minute of this at RPE 9, and it was like rest 30 seconds. And then it was 1 minute of this at RPE 9, and it was like 4 rounds of that. I was like, you'd be like dead for a week if you did that.
Yeah, but
I feel like a lot of people's view of RPE is inflated, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but what's the intrinsic problem with that?
It's that you can't do that.
Is that RPE, there's a leg, right? There's a leg.
Yeah, like
your RPE is going right. Like when you start, like people have to understand that RPE is like the wording would have to be towards the end of each set or towards the end of the 4th set, it should feel like an RPE of 9 out of 10.
Right. Yeah.
But like the first set might not feel that hard, but then the second set's going to feel worse, and then each set is going to feel worse than the previous because that's what you're asking for. And the 4th set might be the same pace as the first one, and it's going to feel really hard. Yeah. So then in those terms, I usually say very high effort, but a repeatable effort. Like I want it to feel hard, be hard, but I want you to repeat the effort.
Generally, are you looking for that for CrossFit athletes like sport work, that it's hard but repeatable?
That's the most common prescription I would say I would give, is that high effort, repeatable pace, because you're always trying to reward that, or not reward that, but condition that in people, is to figure out how to do that, because Like you want them to understand the behavior of, like I was saying about RPE projection into the future, like how is it going to feel moving forward? And because RPE is the most real thing of how you're going to do, you want them to be able to have some idea of, like, at the 40-second mark, like what, like an imagine test is a 15-minute AMRAP. Okay, where am I at? Where am I at? At 2 minutes, you're like, am I at? Yeah, okay, this is about right. This is the pace I got to hold, because they're like, in the last few minutes, I'm going to be near 10 out of 10 holding this pace. That's what you want from people. And a good way to do that, right, is to have them practice doing that in training, right? Really novel concept is to have them, practice it. But yeah, you would have them do multiple sets of variations, but then always asking for, like, I want you to do this as repeatable as possible, meaning it's going to be very hard. And I would like the word, like, I'm not using this wording, but the way I would think of it, right, is there's a scale of repeatability, right? And usually I'm asking for near max repeatability. So what's the highest threshold of repeatability we can push in terms of pacing? Like, if I asked you to row 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, and I said, okay, I want you to do it at 2 minutes for 500 meters, right? That's a really low repeatability requirement, right? You're not that aspect of your fitness is not being challenged. But if I said I want you to do it at like 130 for 5 sets, you might go, I could maybe do that. And you're like, so that might be the max repeatable, right? Yeah. But if that was the task, then then that's a good training scenario for you if that's what you're trying to do, versus you doing like 122, 124, 127, 131, 136 for the last set. Like, yeah, you might have had an overall better score, but that's not what you were going for. The goal wasn't to kill you. The goal was to have you try to achieve a max repeatable pace. And you achieved that with the 130. And so that's what you wanted. And the challenges in CrossFit is that it's not so clean as that, right? You don't get to pick intensities. The individual has to sense it and understand it. And so that's why that's why, in my opinion, you should always be working on that. People can never get too good at understanding and projecting efforts.
How might that differ for strength work?
For strength work, in what way? Like using RPEs?
RPEs, percentages. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I would tend to go towards wording, because that's what I feel people understand. Now, most times, there's always still user errors and just design errors on my part, prescribing the wrong thing or the wrong weight, or thinking like underestimating it, overestimating. That's always a problem with design. But like usually, and it's based on the point of it, right? So you think of, let's just take snatching as an example, right? I'm not usually writing it with the idea or the intention that I'm going to push them to failure, right? It's usually in some form of building in load, and working within like acceptable ranges of technical performance, and not trying to get out of that, because I'm always wanting, most individuals I work with is that they have to make their way up the scale of skill ability in that movement. So I design it in that way most often, with like, okay, we have to move them from this like level, or what I would think of as like -2 on the movement, to move them up to a 0 to a +1, hopefully maybe a +2 is the highest level of the range conceptually I would have. And that's what and then wherever they are in that design is how I think about how to design it. So if you have someone at a -2 for a snatch, you know who that is. Someone who like barely knows how to lift the barbell, barely know how to take it off the ground, they're new to it. So the way you design that and the way you prescribe it is entirely contingent on that ranking of -2, right? Versus if you have someone at like a +2 in snatching, and I mean specifically in the scenario of just lifting the barbell, rest, lift, rest, lift, rest, not in the context of rowing burpees and snatching, because you could take a weightlifting champion and they're +2 on snatching, but you put them into the wrong scenario and they're no longer +2 because the scenario is not there. They don't know how to do that. But in terms of CrossFit, that's usually the starting point I would have with any of those things. Now, the ability to go between -2 and +2, and for people not understanding that, that's just thinking of like the range of ability from -2 to +2. Just saying it very quickly is the max scale in my head. And I use the -2 because I think it's a good signal for your brain to understand what you're designing. as opposed to 0 to 4 or something like that. Seeing the minus is like, oh yeah, I have to remember this. Like this design is a fragile design. You have to be very careful with what you're giving. Versus if you have someone who's very capable, you can be less careful. And you shouldn't be.
Do you have
careful.
that actually built out, or is that more of a mental framework?
This is why that's so funny because like I remember I said to you that that's at some point new seminar. Yeah, this is it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I do have it written down, but I don't have it put together. And I
gotcha.
Yeah. So, but this is an example of it. But that's how I would think of it. Yeah, and then so in terms of RPE for strength stuff, it depends on what you're talking about. Like certain movements, I don't care if people max it out. Like if you fail a pull-up, max it a pull-up, max it a press, a bench press. Maybe bench press I'm not as fond of, but a shoulder press, strict press, dumbbell rows, dumbbell bench, I don't care if you max that out. That really makes no difference. As long as you're not doing it like repeatedly within a session, and especially if I'm not asking for it, if it's based on a certain time in a session. But the other things in terms of front squatting, back squatting, deadlifting, I'm never asking for a 10 out of 10. I'm usually using words such that, so for a back squat, it might be, I want this to be a really heavy set of like say 5 for the day. I want you to get it done in under 25 seconds. So I don't want you sitting around with the bar on your back and doing quasi clustered sets. I want you to do a heavy set of 5 under 25 seconds, but I don't want not a max effort. Like you should be able to add another 5 or 10 to the bar, that type of thing. And whatever that is for the day. If I'm writing it that way. If I'm writing it in percentages, I usually write a range with it to allow people to work into it. So it's like the most common one would be like, I want you to do 5 reps at, 78 to 83%. That's quite a range, but that allows, some people can barely hit the bottom range and other people have no problem hitting the top range. But the idea is that that is kind of where I'm aiming for you to be. And I want you to do like anywhere between 2 to 4 sets. Like if you're barely making the bottom range on the day and you're like, man, this is really hard, just do 2 sets. That's enough. If you're feeling good, then you could do the top range for multiple sets because you're obviously feeling good, and that let's get a really good training stimulus out of this today. Mm-hmm. And I try to do that. As best I can in a lot of scenarios to allow for, auto regulation by individuals to go, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And some athletes that you would work with that are really competent in terms of knowledge of themselves and understanding, like they really fit the framework of know yourself, which is a moniker we use often, they will modify it for themselves. And they will change it a bit and go like, oh, I should do this today, or I don't feel this great, so I'm going to change this. That's great. That's what I want. That's what I want them to do. And they know that, so that they just tell me afterwards, I changed it to this because I wasn't feeling great, or I did this because I know that's not what you're asking for, and I wasn't doing too good today. That's perfect. That's what you want, because I write the training usually a week at a time. And even if I just wrote it a day at a time, people are still going to respond a little differently. Because then you would be down to writing it 10 minutes at a time. You're like, I'm just going to write the workout as you do it. You're like, well, that's too chaotic, right? Because then you can't plan things out. So what you have to do is I just want individuals to try to take some more and more and more ownership of it.
Certainly that's probably a phenomenon in all sport, like unpredictability to some degree, or like an acceptable range performance. Like, if you're in powerlifting or something, you can expect somebody to be, carrying more fatigue because of, lifestyle factors or whatever that when they come in. But do you feel like having those ranges and a bit of built-in auto-regulation is even more important in CrossFit?
The higher the level of the individual, I think the ranges are required. Yeah. The lower the level, I don't think it's required.
Yeah.
Because you shouldn't even be, I don't think you should be even pushing them that hard.
Yeah. And their designs aren't as complicated.
No. So if you're like, I want you to do 5 reps of this, you're like, I want you to do 5 reps of it. Just do it. Like, it's because we're not really managing fatigue per se, because you're not doing that much. Like you work out 4 times a week, dude. You're not overtrained, right? If anything, you're just not eating enough, or you're not sleeping enough, or whatever. It's not that you're overtraining. Like you're not doing anything.
Do you have a topic that you'd like to request as a future show? or just a question about training, reach out to me. My email is ben@zorfitness.com, or you can DM me on Instagram @zorfitness. Lastly, head over to zorfitness.com if you want to browse all of our previous shows with in-depth show notes, as well as educational content for all things training. Let's talk about damper setting a bit.
Damper?
And yeah, damper. So, I feel like normally I would not, with somebody of your experience, I feel like I wouldn't normally bring this up because I feel like I haven't really thought about this differently in a long time, but hearing you talk about it, I want to re-question things, and that's I think a helpful thing maybe. So, how maybe do you help?
What do you mean hearing me talk about it? What do you mean hearing me talk about it?
I'm just curious to know, yeah, your process for figuring this out. Like,
no, you said that you're hearing me talk about it. Did I?
Oh,
did I mention
not necessarily
somewhere?
damper setting, but duty cycle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that can relate maybe to something like damper setting, especially if it's on something like a bike with gears. Right?
Okay.
Like it changes your RPMs.
Yeah.
Or like your stroke rate.
Yeah.
Your strides per minute, that sort of thing.
Yep.
How do you maybe like think about athletes? Yeah, like how do you help them figure out where they should be?
Okay, so with I would say again, just starting back to the basics of learning to row. I just let people look at the stroke, look at the way you want it to be done, and then go, okay, try to emulate this, and then work on it and work on it and work on it, and then you have to allow the individuals to figure it out, right? Because if they get it on their own and they get to where it needs to be on their own, they'll own that. They're like, this is the way I did it, and I get it. I understand what I'm doing here. Versus if you're always their brain, if you're always replacing their brain and their sense of awareness because you're telling them what to do all the time, then you're maybe, initially it might be faster, but are you taking something from them in the long run? Like, are you taking the ability to them to go, I can figure this out and I know how to do it because I've done this over and over and over, and I'll just figure it out and I'll learn the best way to do it for me, and then I'll work on trying to make that better and trying to make my movement more effective, right? Yeah, so like with rowing, again, the initial point is like, first, learn how to row a lot, learn how to row at a lot of different paces, and learn how those paces manifest themselves in terms of RPE based on different times. Like, that's still the most important aspect of it, right? So like, learn how to have a proper and smooth row stroke, and the smoothness will come over time. But then I do think that I definitely allow people to set the damper for themselves unless they're doing something a bit odd. Like if you had a bigger guy and he's rowing at like a damper 3, I'd be like, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. And
So
or vice versa. If you had a smaller female and she's rowing at a 6 or a 7, you're like, you probably shouldn't do that either. You should move down. And obviously, the concept too the rower has a damper setting, like a projected damper setting, but it's still just going to come down to, I think, what the person feels best doing, right? Because the best thing to it's hard for people to understand that, but whatever allows for the lowest RPE at the set pace is the best option. Now, like there is such thing as being like a preferred pace. So you have your preferred stroke rate or your preferred damper setting on a rower or a skier or a bike erg. And this is what you're used to. So any deviation from that is going to feel different, right? And so you may need to spend more time doing it to actually, it's not going to be a quick, aha, this actually does feel easier right away. You may need to train it a bit and go, okay, this is actually a more effective damper setting for me in this scenario. And this is the common refrain I would get when I made a post a little while ago talking about damper settings on a bike erg. And research just continually shows that using a moderate to higher damper setting or a setting for a gear on a bike is more efficient in terms of energy utilization at a given power output. Okay. But people But people who are like big time cyclists, they don't like that.
Yeah, this is sort of what I was
They
getting
much
at.
prefer having a much higher pace. And I don't know. Again, I'm not a cyclist, so I can't tell you. But I don't know if that's just kind of like the habit that's taken place in the group, that this is what they do. Versus like, have you actually just tried doing it the other way? Because again, I could just go downstairs right now, and I can go use myself as an example, and I can bike at a set pace on the biker. Let's just I'll pick a pace that's a high effort but sustainable. So like 155 per kilometer. And I can do that for 20 minutes. And I could do that like once a week for 10 weeks. And I can go use a different damper setting each week from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 over the 10 weeks up to 10. And a couple of those are going to be the most efficient, and some of those are going to be very inefficient. So you're going to see it's going to almost appear like what should be a sustainable pace at a damper 1 is going to be unsustainable. Like I'm going to get to a point where I probably can't even make 20 minutes. But if I just move the damper up to like 3, I can start making it. But then if I move the damper to like 6, it'll feel much easier. And then if I go to 7, it'll still be doable, but it won't feel right. It'll feel like it's a little too heavy. But I'm like, I could probably get used to this. But then 8, 9, and 10, it starts getting really hard again, right? So somewhere in there is the optimal range for me. But it is, for most people, it's probably a little higher than you think, right? The goal isn't like for me, the goal wouldn't be to be at 95 RPMs going at that pace. The goal would be to be in the 70s.
Yeah.
Because it's mechanically a lot easier. And I don't want to get into it, but there's reasons for that. And it's based on the behavior of the contraction speed of muscle fibers. And that's just the repercussions of doing that.
Yeah. Like there's research from, and this was like when I was back in school, but they were like, yeah, professional baseball players, they swing like this donut on the bat, and it's heavier than it is. And then it subjectively, feels like you are moving the bat a lot faster, so it feels good when you go out there. But the science showed that if they went out and swung like a really light bat, like a wiffle ball bat, that when they went and swung their normal bat, it was overspeed, but it felt slow to them. So a lot of professionals still use the donut, even though it like isn't matched by the science. Where maybe it's like a similar thing in like the cycling community, where it's like, science is saying that if you're in a higher gear, like a bigger chain, that you're going to be at lower RPMs, and that should reduce your RPE. But, people in the community, they, like, just being at the higher thing, higher cadence. And maybe in part too, like, and this is my subjective experience, is like, if I'm actually cycling on land, there's a lot more like terrain variance.
Yeah.
And that and it also requires just like more like micro accelerations. And I would guess that's also true in like a group, like a Peloton. Versus
which is
when you're
harder
sitting
to
on a
do
biker.
at a lower gear.
Yeah, it's
right?
harder to accelerate a bike when you're at a low RPMs.
Yeah.
Where if you are at a much lower cadence sitting on a stationary bike, you don't need to accelerate unless you're towards the end of the event, and then you can you know where you're at. So yeah, I don't know.
But again, in terms of constant workload, right, on a bike erg, right, or even on a bike trainer, you will, based on all research I read, you will do better if you put the gear slightly higher and reduce your RPMs down a bit. Like if you're used to doing 95, 90, like try doing 80, 85 and train at that.
Yeah. And also I think that's
because again, like in a sport like if you're done with cycling, again, that might be irrelevant because like you're talking about, it's like, well, I want to do it like this because I have to get used to training and practicing and racing. It's like, okay, fine. But in a sport like CrossFit, there's very little argument. You're like, you should do what is the absolute most economical way to do this.
Yeah.
Because you're on erg, you don't change gears on, you just speed up, slow down. So you want to get it so that it's as easy as possible.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think maybe too for CrossFitters, I mean, they're so used to being on air bikes that have no gears, and those are at a pretty low RPMs for the most part, especially if you're a female. So it's like you should already be used to that slower turnover. So that should
like most women
also,
are doing most echo bike stuff in the range of 55 to 65 RPMs.
Yeah. So very low.
And guys are like not only 10 RPMs higher on average, like 65, right. 75 is where they spend the bulk of their echo bikes time.
Right. So then also, like, not only would that higher damper setting on something like a C2 bike potentially have performance benefits to just that, but then it would also translate, because a lot of people, tend to use the C2 bike for a lot more like aerobic stuff, right? So it's like they can sit on that and text if they want or whatever, right? So
or
it allows them
read books in the case of our gym.
Yep. So it's like that would also then translate back to the air bike, which is used more frequently in in-person competitions. And
it may be.
Hopefully maybe, yeah. But it could have a better carryover as well.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. All right. One more thing I want to touch on here.
Sure.
It's just hard work versus easy work. And how much, again, for competitive CrossFit athletes, how much of each you might give them.
Yeah, again, it comes down to the schedule and who you're talking about. If people have a really free schedule and they can do a lot of training and I feel like they need it, I will give them multiple sessions per day, like 2 sessions a day for some days. And on the first session, they may just do, especially if like it's summer, they'll probably do like some easier running, and then we'll progress that out from like a starting point to what I think is like a max volume for them. And for most CrossFitters, it's literally like 20 kilometers a week is probably max. In terms of running volume, that'd be a lot for a lot of them. And most times it's less than that. And then, or you would do it on an erg, right? But most often with people, that's not the case. Most often, they have jobs. The people I coach, they have jobs. I don't think I have any. I'm not thinking of it, but I don't think I have any clients right now who are not working or are like 100% on just training. And so most of them, you have to work around their schedule, right? So you can imagine if you work from, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., you could, conceivably do training in the morning, but that means you're getting up at 5 a.m. and you're training until like 7 and then getting ready and going to work. And that's assuming that means you don't have kids if you're doing that, because you're not doing that if you have kids. And if you are, then you're not doing it after work. So unless the goal is to get divorced as fast as possible, then you could do that. But yeah, it's just not a viable option for most people. So the way I would use easy work is I would design it into the intense work, right? And I would use it to maybe improve the context of the design. And something I've shared through my seminars, and I know someone like Sam obviously likes it because he talks about it and shares it. So something would be in like an example of, instead of doing, for people like that who are, limited on time potentially, and they want to be competitive, just a simple example. If you're like, hey, instead of doing 20 unbroken pull-ups every 4 minutes for 5 sets, let's do 20 unbroken pull-ups and let's just do some easy shuttle running in the rest time. So it's actually not rest. It's like you're going to end up doing the pull-up design. So I think of 3 things, right? You're going to get the volume in that I want you to get. You're going to also get some running volume in, which we want you to do. And you're also going to get the added benefit of the context of the pull-ups. Like you're going to increase the slight challenge from a slight increase in fatigue, and you're not starting the pull-ups from quote unquote rest, right? You're starting the pull-ups from running into the bar. Now the arms are starting from rest. The arms haven't worked per se during the shuttle run, but the cardiovascular and respiratory system have, right? And so it's constantly delivering blood to the working musculature during the shuttle run. And then you jump up on the pull-up bar, and then you start doing the pull-up motion, right? And so your cardiovascular system has to adjust and adapt and start delivering blood to that, which is obviously much more akin to what CrossFit is, right? You go from one movement to the next, and the movements and the muscle groups are different. And so that's what your cardiovascular system has to do and has to adapt to quickly. And so I just call those work designs. And then so the next level would be like, okay, well, now let's put the running at a different point, and now we've progressed it up to a point where we're doing 20 pull-ups, 20 chest to bar every 4 minutes for 5 sets, but now we're doing with rowing. And now you're at a point where you're back to rowing 205, 210, and you're doing 20 pull-ups every 4 minutes unbroken. But you're still able to do that row at 205, 210, and now you're still doing the pull-ups unbroken. And the way visually I see that is the same thing as doing, effectively a 20-second bike sprint, not max effort, but a pace you could probably hold for 40 seconds. And then you're going to do 3 minutes and 40 seconds at a slower pace on the bike. That's effectively what I'm conceptualizing it as for the arms. When you're doing 20 pull-ups fast, and then you're doing 20 or the remaining time on the rower at an easy pace, right? You're doing arm sprints and then arm easy. That's what it is, right? But if you're to measure what the desaturation is and where it's coming from, it's obviously coming from the upper body mostly. And then you're going on to a machine that allows for a lower intensity, sustainable metabolic rate for continued contractions. And it's a good way to develop work capacity in the limbs, potentially, right? As opposed to just doing work rest of 20 pull-ups every 4 minutes for 5 sets, in which, there's nothing wrong with getting good at that. And like even just saying, let's do 21 every 4 minutes for 5, 22, 23, you get to a point where you can do more and more. And that's good. But the context of the sport is not like that. It's not, you're rarely starting pull-ups from rest. You're starting pull-ups from something else, right? So to me, it's a good way to add context to the training and to basically sneak the easy work in. And because I found people don't really love doing a lot of easy work on its own.
Yeah.
And so you sneak it in and it works, and they enjoy that. They like it.
Yeah. I feel like for the people who select to do CrossFit as their sport, that kind of framework, is enjoyable for a lot of them because it keeps the RPE of the entire thing a little bit lower, which to me at least I find people tend to enjoy a bit more. And then it also is, like you're saying, translates back to the sport a lot better than just doing the isolated thing.
Yeah, it translates in the way of, well, you're getting more continued blood flow to the areas that need to be worked and trained, which is the upper body. And you're hoping that in like the long-term format of things that will add more work capacity to the upper body in the actual sporting scenario.
If this is too long of a conversation, we can save it for some other time. There's one of the things that is interesting is that certain types of athletes obviously struggle with unique things, and some of them, the mixed scenarios are way more challenging. Like, I'm an example of an athlete who you will look at my time trial data and be very unimpressed, but I tend to do fairly well in the sport. And there's people who are the opposite, where you look at them and on paper they should be games athlete because they have all these fantastic, their 2K row is great, their max unbroken ring muscle ups is great, their their power clean numbers are great, whatever, right? Like their metrics are really good, but then when you put them into the mixed settings, things fall apart for some reason. I'd just be curious, how you think about training that athlete differently.
So really quickly, it would, again, I have to use generalities here to make any sense of this. So we could just say, okay, is that athlete hardware limited or is that individual software limited? Is the reason that they can't perform well in the sport just because they have a limitation on the software side of things where, let's just say strategically, they don't know how to do the sport. Again, which relates to pacing. They pace novel scenarios inappropriately, which obviously means they have a poor understanding of RPE. They don't understand how hard they're working at any given time, and they can't project that out. And so you go, okay, well, this is a coaching / training, specific training design thing. We should give them more practice in these types of things to hopefully upgrade that understanding and help them become a better competitor. Is it anxiety? Did they just have performance anxiety, which is very common? And they have to learn how to deal with that. And it's probably not going to come from the coach. It's going to come from themselves and maybe like a sports therapist, talking to them, giving them strategies of how to work through it, how to deal with it. So again, there's a whole bunch of those things which are potential, right? There's other things like people just don't like trying hard when it comes like, right? They just don't. They're like, wow, this is really hard and I don't really want to do it. And you're like, okay, well, because you can have someone else who, like you're saying, who's not really that gifted per se, but they work their absolute tail off when it comes to a competition. Those people are hard to beat. So like this guy is going to go 100% everything they got. And that's hard to beat. Always. It's always hard to beat someone who works really hard, especially on events that are, less bottlenecky or they don't have that in there. Mm-hmm. But on the other side of it, right, if you're like, if the person, I guess if they have good, it usually would be, and if it comes down to that, like they have good stats, like, they're good at a set of ring muscle ups, they're good at a row, but as soon as you start mixing it up, they don't do well. Yeah. I guess my initial instinct would be to think that would be categorized as someone who has like, what quote unquote delivery limited athlete. So they need to train to improve the ability of their system and their cardiovascular system to recover one area of the body quickly and then work on the other. And so like example would be like that, like maybe you need to prioritize designs for this person where it always goes between the body. It always goes upper, lower from movement to movement, because you're trying to emphasize like having adaptations to like upper body. So like say it's a set of like pull-ups, pistols, box jumps, handstand push-ups, that type of thing. Like you're having the person having to figure that out or have their system get experience with that and get used to it. But I would say more often than not, it's on the other side of things where it's a software problem.
Yeah. That's a very good point. I mean, the number of athletes who truly deal with like the, something like what they go back from, pistols to their chest to bars and they're dealing with cramping or like really like blood flow redirection issues is way less than somebody who's just like, you just need to experience more mixed settings and figure out how to pace it appropriately.
Yeah. And most like the goal, like honestly, the coaching goal, the goal would be to have it so it's mostly just like hardware issues. You're like, okay, you know how to do this, but the real issue with the ring muscle ups is we got to add a little more endurance to the pressing. We just got to add a little more of that, and then we're good. Like that's a great scenario to have, right? It's like, okay, well, the reason that you didn't finish this one is because the grip fatigue was a little too much, and we just got to work on that. And those are the really great athletes because they know that and they go, okay, I just got to work on this. And if I work on this, as soon as this comes up again, I got it. Versus people who don't think that way. They don't have the self-confidence or the self-efficacy to think like that. They don't believe that. They could do the training they need to do. They could experience the exact scenarios they need to experience, but they don't download that into their brain. They don't download that as like, this is what I need to do. This is what's going to make me better. They don't have that self-efficacy of like, this is productive stuff. I'm getting better doing this. They don't think like that. Right. Whereas if you gave, one of my favorite CrossFitters, like Brent Fikowski, who recently retired, he won't talk like that. He'll be doing things like, this was good. This is what I got to do. This is going to help me here. Yeah. And he believes it. And that's what you need. Right? You need to have it exactly like that, where I'm working on this, and I'm going to get better at that. And when the time comes, I'll be there. But some people you can take them right to the water and they're not going to drink. And it just is that just is what it is, because CrossFit allows a large and a wide array of people to compete. And in many different sports, it happens, right? You take people from a lower level, like in any of the professional sports. So my favorite sport is hockey, which like coincidentally is the best sport. So it's good that that's my favorite sport. But anyway, like you can take guys from the lower levels who are really good, but as soon as they get to the top tier and things really start mattering, the context messes with them and they can't play anymore and they get washed out because they were only good amongst a certain level of competitor. But once they got put up with the best competitors, things didn't work so well anymore and they couldn't adapt. And then they were out of the league. They're gone. Right? But like that, like this is that again, they're not doing anything wrong. It's just, that is what it is. But a lot of, and again, because I think CrossFit is very much a social media sport, people hate that. They just hate the fact that that's what the reality is. Like, you're just not good enough. And that's okay. Like, I'm not good enough either. I wasn't good enough. But that's what it is. And it's not your coach's fault, and it's not your fault. Well, it kind of is your fault.
Maybe your parents' fault.
But it's the reality of it. Like, people are going to be better than you, and there's some things you're not going to get good at no matter how much you try. You're only going to get good at it for yourself, and you're going to get better at it for yourself. But that's not what sports don't care about that. They don't care if you got 10% better if you needed to get 50% better. It doesn't care. It's like the standard is here and you can't do it, and that's okay. But you're going to hate it, but I mean, it is what it is, and you just can't do it.
Yeah, but I think that's, I mean, part of coaching is like being honest with athletes and, you know, cutting through all the noise and helping them do that too.
Yeah, you can be honest with them when they trust you. And if they trust you, you should be honest with them. And then they should know that you're being honest because you're trying to help them. Right? And you're trying to set them up for success in whatever that means, right? And there's lots of athletes I work with and I have a really good relationship with, and they just trust me. And so if I'm like, I think you should do this and this is what you should do, they'll be like, yeah, I think so. Or because they trust me, they'll be like, no, I think I should do this. And they'll be like, okay, well, okay, if you think that, then I think you can do that, then we can do that. But they'll only say that if they trust me. They'll only disagree if they're like, I know I can disagree with him and be fine because he's not going to get mad or something. So yeah, that's the beauty of coaching, right? Because we start this conversation talking about motivation or something, and then we end on something completely different because coaching is so vast, right? There's a lot to it.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time.
All right, man. Well, thanks for asking me to come on.
Thanks for listening today. If you're someone who just started listening to the show, I would encourage you to subscribe so you can stay up to date. If you're someone who's been listening for a while, I would encourage you to rate and review the show. And lastly, the best thing that you can do to support our work is also the best thing that you can do for your performance. And that is by hiring one of our coaches. Until next time, stay the course.